And welcome everyone to today's Metal AM webinar, where the subject of today's webinar is how to adopt, grow and scale with the HP Metal Jet S100 platform. It's my great pleasure today to welcome our guest speaker from HP, Brett Harris. He's the Senior Product Manager for Additive within HP. We'll be talking for about 30 or 40 minutes, and you'll have the opportunity to ask any questions in the comments section, and then we will come back to those questions at the end of the webinar. So without any further ado, I'll hand over to Brett.
Thank you, Martin. Appreciate the introductions and welcome. I'm glad to be able to share this the HP Metal Jet S100 platform configuration platform with you. Kind of our approach to this market, and just a little bit of background about myself, and then we'll get into this. I've been with HP about 7 years now, and before that was within several different type of industrial customers, primarily on the user side of things. So I was using manufacturing equipment, installing it, using it in new modalities and new production. So bringing that perspective to this is kind of a unique perspective that we provide in our offering here, and really is from the viewpoint of the customer. So this is where you'll see the adopt, grow, scale, and then I added a fourth bullet to this is profit from the use of the S100 platform. So we'll get into the presentation now. So thank you for joining. So we're on the agenda. I'm going to go through kind of four main points here. One is a brief introduction to who HP Additive Manufacturing Solutions is and what businesses constitute and make up that business unit within HP. So just a couple slides on that, just give you some background on our purpose. The first kind of meat of the presentation that we'll get into is common adoption challenges, as I call this. Is really where we take the voice of the customer input, and customer feedback into how do we create the product and how do we position the product to solve a problem and problems for customers. This is where we lead into the platform configurations, and then this is where we'll spend a lot of most of our time today is kind of going through those configurations, what use cases, target customers best fit the different configurations, and how you can scale from one configuration to the other seamlessly. And then the last piece of this is how this is positioned in the market from a competitiveness standpoint and the scalable value that we're bringing to the market. So these are the kind of the four areas that we'll touch on, the last two being the most of them. So who is HP Additive Manufacturing? Really it's the what, how, and the why. So the why is, we want to accelerate access to transformative manufacturing solutions, and we'll do that through as I'll show here in a minute, our polymer business as well as our metals business. So we have two separate kind of material classes that we look at, metals and polymers. The multi-jet fusion, most folks has been around longer. Been around a lot longer than metals, and is a platform that metals is leveraged off of. How do we do this is really kind of the crux of what we're looking at. Is we want to be able to get people to enable the technology and scale it efficiently. And why is that important? It's important because not everybody's going to have an experience with using metal powders or how to handle metal powders and binder jetting and all. So we want to be able to make it affordable for them to get in and learn how to use it. And once they learn how to use that, is the work that they do in terms of parameter development, application development is easily transferable to the next stage of production. So you don't have to go through a whole nother layer of qualification and expensive qualification, but we'll talk about that here in a minute. And then we want to be a transformative manufacturing partner for our customers going forward. So that's kind of the purpose and the mission and the vision behind the additive manufacturing business within HP. As I mentioned before, there are two threads to that within the additive manufacturing group: polymers and metals, as you see here. But both are leveraging our 30 years of printing heritage within HP. HP is known as a printing company, obviously, and the print heads and the layering process that we use in both processes or both manufacturing modalities is leverages off that expertise. And then we have both the systems have similar layering techniques and processes. In fact, the Metal Jet system is kind of a build on what the successes of the multi-jet fusion platform has been able to achieve. And so we've been able to leverage off of that and apply that to metals. And then the emphasis on repeatability and reliability within the manufacturing sector. Those are just key. You'll hear those two words kind of come over and over again throughout the presentation. And that's really a core focus of our group, is to be able to scale, but also do it repeatably and reliably. So you'll see this slide here, and you'll see a couple of slides as I go through these that kind of introduce the different sections. But these are key input to our configuration platform model was gathering voice of the customer information through market resonance work that we did and just talking with customers. In the end, as I tell folks, we have products that are successful because it's solving a problem for customers and it's something that customers see value in. And so the first piece is identifying, as we entered into this, identifying what some key pain points and challenges customers are having with their current 3D printing platforms and or any conventional manufacturing platforms that they have. And you can see here, this one particular customer pointed out that speed, not fast enough, basically the slow speed of the technology, it wasn't scalable, meaning that for them to go into production, they would have to buy either new hardware, a new type of printer, and they'd have to go through a whole new qualification process. And the precision wasn't good enough for their purposes in terms of mating surfaces. So this kind of captures, in essence, what we were looking at from the voice of the customers. And so we identified kind of 4 areas with this. Is that one was that customers really had complications and challenges with labor costs. The process was complex. The time to achieve a good part was taking too long. And I would add to that the labor required to get it into a qualification state. The other was ROI. At the end of the day, you put manufacturing processes into place to generate revenue and generate profit for your company and make your products easier to make, as well as quicker to market. So the entry cost to get into this particular printing platform was too high. Whether so the application use cases was very narrow. It's only a handful of applications would be applied here. So the ROI was really hard for customers to see and project going forward. Again, the labor costs in terms of process complexity kind of translated over industrial skills, which is that in order to be successful or to accelerate the adoption of the technology, you really needed to know a lot about it first as you entered into it to understand the nuances in terms of curing and part positioning within the builds and whatnot. And also with sintering. So, a good suite of industrial skills was needed in order to be successful. So we tried to, again, that was a challenge in terms of the labor force. And then sintering is not everybody has a sintering furnace in their facility. So when you're dealing with powder metallurgy, sintering is a key component to that. And some folks view that as the gating function for new binder jet customers. So as I like to say, in order for us to cast a wider net of potential customers, we needed to address these pain points to make it easier for them to adopt the technology and use it and see the benefits and then project that forward. So how do we do this? We tackled it by One, enabling scalable end-to-end configurations, which allowed us to basically offer to customers a lower cost entry point that they can be able to get access to the technology and use it at a much lower cost of entry. And that also allowed us to do, in terms of reducing the development cycles to get to a good part, as well as reducing the development cycles to get into a production mode. The other things that we did to tackle this is that I'll point here is we've got some pre-tested end-to-end print workflows and sintering profiles. So we tried to take the guesswork out of a lot of the effort that goes into sintering, as I mentioned before, but also to give customers a starting point at which they can begin developing their applications, some set points in terms of print parameters, printing workflows, sintering profiles, that they can take those and begin working with their applications. The other thing we did is in terms of ROI was expanding the use cases that could be applied with this technology. The high mix, low volume is a key point here. We're seeing that a lot in the investment casting world as investment casters have consolidated. A lot of those are big conglomerates that basically want to do, low mix, super high volume. So if you have parts that are only a few thousand that you need for legacy spares and so on, there's either a 9-12 month lead time to get those done, or there's just super expensive. So we're seeing a very strong case in high mix, low volume applications these days. And then the last thing on the sintering I'll point out is that not only did we provide pre-tested sintering profiles to customers, but we've got we've generated data on a variety of sintering furnaces to show the capability of that, of those profiles across different sintering furnaces and sizes, but also showing that you can do a non-hydrogen sintering profile. A lot of customers or a lot of sintering profiles will assume a hydrogen atmosphere. What we've done is taken that to another level to also provide inert atmosphere and argon atmospheres for customers who may be a little hesitant to bring hydrogen in their facility at this stage. So it gives them a starting point to understand sintering, get successes with that, and as they get more comfortable with it, then get into the hydrogen aspect of sintering to the next level. So this is kind of a detailed background of what's led us into the platforms that we've created here. So when taking all that into effect, there's kind of three pillars that we wanted to focus on in our development work. One is we wanted to reduce a development effort. And so what that implies is that if you're developing parameters, print parameters in the development phase, as I'll get into on a single printer and build unit and kind of in a R&D setting, you develop those parameters. Those parameters and that development work is directly transferable into mass production. So as you scale up, those parameters will scale with you and are applicable to the printing system, because you're not changing the printer as you scale up. The same printer you use in development is the same printer you use in mass production. And so that's a key thread through this. We also focus on manufacturing reliability. Again, the same binder, same print heads, same process parameters, as I mentioned, are all used from development all the way through into mass production. And it's a cost-efficient scaling of the process. And you can add productivity modules, as I mentioned, and as I'll show you earlier, a little bit later, and build units or cure stations to the same printer and achieve higher productivity with the same printer. And what some of these pictures here show you the results that we've been able to get, and we can dig into these more detail with our if contacting us. But the overall OEE in terms of the reliability of the equipment and the processes, as well as the mechanical repeatability that we've been able to achieve with the platform, are proven here and shown here with the results that we've got through the different powder lots, different builds across printers. And so you can see the fairly consistent results that we've gotten. So now we'll get into what those configurations look like. So again, another quote from a large aerospace customer that kind of validated the thought process that we had here, which was they really want to start small in terms of, again, minimize their investment up front, but allow that investment to be able to scale up efficiently as they get prove performance, gain confidence, and grow accordingly. So I will. The next slide will go into a little bit of a video that introduces you to the concept of the configurations and the platform that we have. And so I will do that. So this little video is available on our website, and it gives you like I said, a 30-second overview of what the S100 platform configurations mean and the purpose behind them. What I'm going to do now is go into detail each of the configurations and give you some background on like I said, use cases, target customers, and so on. So the entry level here is that we have is what we call the S100D, or the development configuration. And really, the customers can start with a printer and a build unit, and they're up and running. Now, the kind of use cases behind this that we envision are customers that are looking to do initial process development or application development work, materials development. And really the driver behind this is that they're not doing really deep builds or complex builds. They're just printing maybe TRS bars or density cubes or just samples, small samples to try to get a feel of how the process works and dialing in the process parameters for that particular application, or just the modality itself. And by doing this is we do offer with the development platform, we offer in-printer curing. And why is this important? Typically with with curing, we have an external curing station where you pull the build unit out, put it in the curing station, and let it cure. So that allows you to use the printer for another build. Whereas in this case, I mean, typically you're operating maybe one shift operation, 8-10 hour shift, and you're only doing a couple print jobs per week per printer. So you do a 40 millimeter build that you can do that usually in about 4 or 5 hours at most. That allows you to do the printing while you're in the office to make sure things are going well. And then before you leave for the evening, you can set the printer up to do in-printer curing, and it will cure overnight. And when you come back into the office the next day or the lab, you pull the build unit out, pull the parts out, start another build, and do that over again. So it allows you to use the time of overnight to be able to do the curing, and it cures in-printer. The build height's limited to 40 millimeters, mainly because of the in-printer curing capability or limitations there. But that'll generally speaking, most cases you're doing material testing or TRS bars, you're not printing much higher than that anyway. So this kind of gives you the development phase of this. Allows you to get, at a low cost, get into the modality, the printing system, and begin exploring with the technology. So as you say, you're doing this and you say, okay, I want to scale into deeper builds and get into a kind of a mid-production or a low-level production mode. So what you can do is you take the same printer, same build unit that you did it on the development phase, and then you can add some components. You add a curing station, or you can add some third-party accessories that we have that we've worked with customers or third parties with, in terms of powder handling or an entry-level furnace, to be able to get into as we call the S100P or the production mode. And the use cases here is that you're getting into some high mix, low to mid volume production. I would say you're doing maybe 2 to 5 print jobs per week per printer, maybe one shift. By adding the cure station, that allows you to do multiple builds in the during the week. And then if you add some additional build units or go into multiple, second shift, that allows you to get up to 10 print jobs per week per printer. The build height here is limited to 100 millimeters. Again, on average, most of the customers so far that we've seen in terms of their print jobs are on average is about 100 millimeters. So we have a lot of data points on that size and that build height. So that gives you that tees you up for a quick success in terms of being able to get into production. And then we see this is mainly with the customers using this or local startup contract manufacturers who are wanting getting into this technology for their to supplement their business, but also some industrial research institutes, labs, OEMs that are looking to prove out the technology to scale that into their production and release that for production. So this is the production mode. Again, the key point I want you to take away here is that we're using in the same printer, same build unit that you use in development, you use that and scale that into production. So again, emphasis on scaling. You're not having to redo your print qualifications in terms of print parameters, application qualification. All that work that you did on the development phase directly carries over into production. Okay. So from here, the next phase is you decide you want to get into mass production. You want to get into, say, a 3-shift operation. You're producing thousands of parts per year, tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of parts per year. So you want to scale this into your production. We call this mass production of the S100. Again, pointing out you're using the same hardware assets that you've used in development and production. You're scaling that into mass production. You use the same printer, same build unit, same curing stations. So then you can add in additional printer cells, build units, curing stations, and then we can add into our productivity modules that we have, which are the powder management station, powder removal station, a high capacity vacuum furnace, additional build units, additional curing stations. If you get the picture. So these are modular productivity add-ons that we have. And as you can see here, our HP's powder management station and powder removal stations can support up to 6 printers. So these are high volume productivity add-ons. As I point, this goes up to 170 millimeters in build height. These are for global contract manufacturers, large OEMs. I mean, this is when you're getting up to upwards of 15 print jobs per week per printer at 3-shift operation. So this is when you're really cranking out hundreds of thousands of parts per year in terms of the production of the system. But again, as I'll emphasize again, the point here is that your development work you start off with in the development phase on this printer, build unit, and eventually a cure station is directly transferable as you scale up into this production mode. And this is kind of the essence of where we want to get to in terms of high productivity, high volume mass production. Okay. So one of the elements that you saw in there is the Voltman V-Port powder management system. This is kind of an entry-level system that we have for if you're using a manual workflow. Again, it allows you to, it interfaces with our build unit. It allows you to depowder parts, load powder into the build unit, all within an enclosed glove box to minimize powder exposure to your operators. So again, this is a third-party asset, not offered through HP, but it is available directly from Voltman with customer, and we can make that connection. But this is leverages their Paltrex system that they have that's commercially available, and then in the glove box that interfaces with our build unit. And this is an effort that we've tried to do with third parties, is to leverage their expertise, but also again, from an affordability and improvement on the ROI, is it allows that for you to scale that or add those components onto your system as you scale up your production and your needs. So as you've heard a lot of times so far in my talking thus far, is that scalability is a huge asset. And as this aerospace customer or component manufacturer mentioned, they said they only use their printers for about 20%, and this is kind of validation of what we were looking for, is that they've used their printers for about 20% as they learn to use them, scale them into production. And that wouldn't have been possible without a low initial cost. And so this is a validation of how they've been able to use the printer and scale that into higher volume production and show the ROI as they grow. So where do we create value? So this is an area that is ultimately where we will, where customers will judge us. Does this create value for them and their production and allow them to do things that they may not be able to do currently or solve a pain point that they have? And so the three pillars that we really can, that really use to determine whether or not we're creating value is, are we have an offering available for entry-level customers so that they can get into the technology and explore it. So it's not really focused on, okay, well, here's a mass production system. Good luck in figuring out. If you don't know how to use it, good luck in figuring it out, but we try. This is really, do we have an offering that allows entry-level customers to gain understanding of the technology and then show value as they scale it up? So this is one area. We want an economical and a scalable ecosystem. So as I mentioned, there are third-party accessories that allow you to have some flexibility in terms of how you use those systems. We have, I'll point out here, an open materials platform. So as long as the materials meet our safety requirements in terms of particle size, explosivity, so on and so forth, then we have an open materials platform. So that gives you the flexibility to use materials that suppliers that you may want to prefer, but we can do that testing with you on that, or give you some feedback. And then the other piece of this is that we have we're competitively positioned against basically the gold standard, which is the laser systems out there, as well as other binder jetting systems. And by that, we've done some testing and some comparisons, and I'll show that here in a minute, and provide sintering data and property data and a part cost information that I'll show here in a second. So the value of scalability. And so I've talked about this a lot, and what I'm trying to position this to show what this means in terms of value. And so a lot of you are familiar with either MRL or TRL readiness levels, manufacturing or technical readiness levels. In the slides, I've got a link to where these are explained. But in essence, what this timeline is a time to production. And when you get into time to production, this is where you're actually getting into profit, where you can get a return on your investment. And as you can see here with the S100 platform, what we've shown and what we've proven out is that as you do go through the feasibility and the process development and the process qualification work, once you complete that and get that link, you can go into production through a scalable system. You're not having to change printers. You're not having to change the process settings, process parameters, because it's the same printer as you go into production that you do this development work on with, so that you have a quicker time into production and a quicker time to profit. Whereas some of our competitors and some of the other platforms that are out there that are I call functional platforms, you can do a lot of research and process feasibility work with them, but as you want to go into process development or process qualification, you got to change platforms. So you have to do a platform transition, invest more money into another piece of equipment, another printing platform, go through the development work around that, and then you can scale into production and into profit from there. As you can see, again, the platform value approach that we have is where that value creation is being generated. I mentioned workflows and sintering profiles. This is where I'll show you where we help customers more quickly get into a success. I'm not going to go into this. There's a lot of small print here, but the intention of this slide is to show you that, if you came to us and said, hey, I'm new to binder jetting, but I've got some applications that seem to be a good fit. How do I get started? This is where we'll walk through these with you and explore with you what the best workflow would be for your application or for your purposes. And then we can kind of walk through that with you and give you the capabilities to succeed more quickly. So these are tested workflows that we have available for customers. And as I mentioned before, the sintering profiles, debind and sintering profiles that we have. As you can see, we have these already mapped out for hydrogen and argon atmospheres. We have segments in terms of the segment types, in terms of the holds, and basically a more detailed profile in terms of how each of these will work. And then the TGA curves for the debind on the binder agent that's in there. And so at the end of the day, what you're looking for, what we've been able to provide and will provide customers get more quickly achieve maximum sinter densities for their applications. So these are profiles that are available for customers. Again, removing the guesswork from the sintering. I call sintering kind of the black magic, because a lot of people protect that, but we try to remove that guesswork so you have a quicker time to success. And then a lot of these presentations and webinars, one thing that always kind of bothers me a little bit is that you get into these and everybody says, well, these are all the great things that we can do, but they don't show any of the results. They don't show that what they've been able to achieve. They just say they can achieve them. And so one of my things as a product manager and teeing our sales team up for success is that I want to be able to give to them the results that we've actually been able to achieve and the outcomes that we've been able to achieve as proof to the customers that we can do these things, that our technology can do these things or do what we say. And so we've started off with what we call disaster checks. And so we picked a handful of furnace companies, different types of furnaces, furnace atmospheres, graphite furnaces, metal retort furnaces, hydrogen atmospheres, argon atmospheres, across the board to test and see the robustness of our profiles and our sintering profiles and the ability to achieve good densities and make sure there are no fatal flaws or disasters, as we call it, in those evaluations. And basically the outcome out of this was that across several different size furnaces, different types of furnaces, we were able to achieve threshold performances in terms of our disaster checks. And this is just sinter properties right now. And so we took that to another level and really said, okay, well, if we optimize the profiles and optimize the work with these different furnaces, can we achieve better than acceptable thresholds on densities? And in all cases, we were able to achieve over 99% density on these performances across the different types of furnaces. So that gave us good validation that the robustness of our print profiles and our printing process, because with any sintering, if you don't start off with a good green part, it's hard to make that up in sintering. So sintering so it gives us a good validation of the robustness of our printing process. We took that to the next level in terms of, well, it's okay to get good sinter densities. What are you looking at? What mechanical properties are we able to achieve? And again, a validation across the board that we were able to achieve, well, all of the properties exceeded NPI minimums, and a majority exceeded the ASTM minimums for yield, tensile, and elongation. Again, this is on, we did 316L and 17.4 pH for these tests. And in this case, all the mechanical properties were were pretty stable across all the different furnace types. Again, wanted to show the capability of the system and of the platform to be able to achieve the results that we say it can achieve. And this is the data that we were able to show customers. And then the last thing, and as in the slides, is that we said, as I mentioned before, we want to position-wise, we'll make sure we're competitively positioned within the marketplace to compete. At the end of the day, we're going to be judged against other technologies, whether it's laser, other binder jetting, investment casting. We're competing with other manufacturing technologies. And so in talking with customers, their feedback has been, at least in this particular manufacturer's feedback, was that laser systems are still super expensive, and the materials are more expensive, and the part cost is higher. And so kind of went through an exercise of okay, what does that look like on the cost per part basis? And so we did a study on an evaluation across some different part sizes. And so this is, I'll kind of walk through this. This always generates a lot of questions, but from a competitive positioning standpoint, excuse me, we looked at both small parts as well as medium and then large parts, 500 grams or greater. And in all cases, what we were looking at is, so the gray boxes above are how many parts per printer are produced annually by the printer. As you can see, the binder jetting parts are about 3 times more productive, or the binder jetting technology is about 3 times more productive than a laser system. So on average, we're producing about 3 times more parts per printer per year than, say, a four laser system. And then from a cost standpoint, part cost standpoint, you can see the advantages there. Again, a lot of that's driven by the number of parts you're able to produce per build, and the number of builds you're able to do per year. So the productivity element there is factored in, as well as as you can see, the hardware cost is pretty significant portion. And as you get into larger parts, you produce fewer of them, so the hardware cost is a larger portion of the cost, and the material cost is fairly expensive. Again, this is as I always like to say, these results are always have a factor of whether or not the variables such as geometry size, features, design complexity, those are all variables that factor into the outcomes here. But for these cases, these were the results. And I think this was the small part was kind of, I think, a watch case. The medium part was like a filter type design, and the large part was a manifold, which I'll show you here in a minute. So this is again, from a competitive positioning standpoint, a key element that we wanted to be able to show customers. And then I always like to use a use case example in these to show that, okay, well, this is all great to talk about, but are you actually doing this? And so in this case, this is a use case of a fuel bypass that was needed for John Deere, and it's a fairly large part, about 400 grams. Had some requirements in terms of pressure testing or a pressure requirement and all, and so I went through some design iterations for it. They were able to consolidate parts by about 20%. Had a much faster development iteration cycle, as I mentioned before. Doing shallower builds, it allows you to go through that much more quickly. Reduce the size, so on and so, and the cost reduction by about 50%. And the time to market was approximately 6 months. From the time they started the project to the time the part was able to get into production or approved for production was about a 6-month period. So this is, again, a use case that allows us to show that what we're doing is actually working, it's creating value for a customer and delivering thousands of parts that otherwise would either cost more or wouldn't be able to do through or have much longer lead time because of casting and so on. And there's a link here. This the there's a link to our website, a web link here that where they did a webinar. John Deere did a webinar with HP to kind of walk through more details of what this was about and how they came to these conclusions. So, in conclusion, we have what Metal Jet, the Metal Jet system has been around since 2022. It's when we first launched that at IMTS. But we have contract manufacturing partners that have applications and productions today. Most of it, a lot of you have seen the announcements and all that we've and have probably talked to our manufacturing partners like Endemem, GKN, Endeavor, 3D, or Parmatech. They all are actively producing applications for customers today at scale. We have proven faster scalability into mass production, as I mentioned earlier, the use case example. The iteration cycles are much quicker. As I mentioned before, the isotropic properties that we're able to achieve with our parts, as well as reliably meeting powder metallurgy industry standards, as I showed with data that we've been able to prove that with the results that we've achieved with the sintering properties that we have, as well as the part quality properties that we've been able to achieve. Again, data that backs up the claims that we're making. And then the productivity advantage over laser binder jetting, or I'll say laser powder bed fusion. As I mentioned before, that is a key element, is that not all parts, some parts will require 100% density, 100% dense parts. But a lot of those parts currently being produced with lasers today that's not a requirement. You don't need a full dense part. And so in that case, the productivity advantages that binder jetting provides, as I mentioned, could also translate to a much more attractive part cost for the customers. And so it positions us well in the market to be able to satisfy that requirement of customers that need that faster productivity advantage. And the last slide here is that if you're interested in more information, HP's been doing these webinars, kind of 30-minute, quick pace, self-paced webinars called Beyond the Forge. Here's a link to that here as needed. They've got where each of those 30-minute segments goes into a little bit more detail on a particular aspect of the Metal Jet S100 solution, whether it's a TCO calculation or comparison against traditional manufacturing. I did a couple of them on materials, where some of the different materials that we've been exploring and developing with customers and with some of our partners. And then there's another one in there on detail about sintering, things that you should consider with sintering. So there's some different details, different 30-minute segments on details around those as well. So that is all I had. So I think I left enough time for us to have some questions, Martin. So.
Thank you, Brett. That was a great presentation. We do have a few questions coming in on the comments, and to all the people that have joined us today, feel free to add your questions to the comment section as we try and go through these questions. I've also written down a bunch of my own questions as well, because this is a super interesting subject. But let's kick off with a question from Dustin Krause, who's really asking about minimum feature sizes, thin walls and things like that, and then also diameters of things like internal pipeways. How easy it's to depowder those kind of channels. And I'm going to guess that's kind of linked to things like the quality of the powder, the size of the powder, and maybe the droplet size of the binder that's being jetted. So perhaps you can say a little bit more about that.
I'll say generally speaking, into Dustin's question, that's usually a question, one of the first questions we get. The minimum feature size in terms of wall thicknesses and all is usually about 0.2 millimeters, give or take. Now, in terms of the diameter size, for some of the conformal cooling work that we've done with Endemem, specifically on tooling applications, molds, it really depends on the particle size of the powder and the layering size that you're doing. Now, I would say I have to dig up what the particle or the diameter size of some of the cooling channels are that they have, but there was a webinar that we did on that where they gave us a little bit more detail on that that we can point you to. But that is a big factor into being able to evacuate the powder out of those cooling channels and not lose the dimensional stability and the surface finish of the cooling channels as well. So is a key element to that. So
I guess a lot of people are already familiar with laser powder bed fusion's attempt or of using that technology to make tooling for mold inserts and so on and so forth.
But I think the advantage too, I'll mention this, another key thing to this, and this is more specific to tooling, but for the cooling, because asking about diameters on cooling channels or internal diameters, the surface finish that we're able to achieve with the binder jetting is much finer than it is, they say, with lasers, and that lends itself another advantage to this, is that from 4 to 7 RA typically is the printed sintered surface finish. So that allows us to start at a much lower a much finer surface finish than lasers. So that's another element to consider as well for internal.
Yeah, in fact, you guessed exactly what I was about to ask actually as well, because I guess one of the problems with the laser powder bed fusion route is that you get that kind of downskin roughness, stickiness that traps the powder. So if you're getting a more uniform finish on all those internal channels, I'm guessing depowdering is a little bit more straightforward.
Yep. Exactly.
Excellent. So another question, and we'll probably link this together from Paul Kiernan and Alberto Carbo. They ask similar questions really about the sintering. So Paul's asking really, what's the trade-off between using vacuum furnaces and sintering in hydrogen? And Alberto's really asking about what densities are achievable and what properties are achievable from sintered parts when either sintering with argon or hydrogen.
So there are really two benefits to sintering with hydrogen versus argon. One is the time. As you probably could see in one of the slides, I had there were two sintering profile curves, one with hydrogen, one with argon, and the argon just takes a little bit longer time in the debind phase to get to basically evacuate all the binder out and clean that out and make sure there's no residual carbon left over. So, the hydrogen and this affinity for carbon pulls the carbon out quicker and pulls the binder out quicker. So you have a much quicker debind cycle. The debind cycle for argon is, so a few hours longer, so it's a longer period of time. So that's one benefit of hydrogen over argon in the sintering cycle. The other with hydrogen is that you typically will, with stainless steel parts, particularly, you tend to get better corrosion properties when you sinter with hydrogen. Now it doesn't mean that you don't get acceptable corrosion properties with doing it in argon, but with the hydrogen it tends to provide a little bit better corrosion resistance with those parts in the sintering cycle. So there's some benefits with that.
And how does that compare or trade off against vacuum furnaces?
Well, the vacuum furnaces, you're doing that under a vacuum, and we've done them in both. We've done sintering in atmosphere furnaces, we call them box furnaces, or cold wall or vacuum furnaces. The vacuum furnaces just we find that the density and the part quality is just that under that vacuum creates a much better control over that.
And do you get more shrinkage in the parts? So do you have to allow for the different types of?
Generally, yeah. In the vacuum furnace, was generally about 17 to 20% shrinkage on the parts. So obviously, you factor that into your part design. The box furnaces or the atmosphere furnaces have a little bit less of the shrinkage, but I would say it's in the 10 to 15%.
Okay, so we've got a question from Thomas Rubenbauer, and I'll combine this with one of my own questions, really. He's asking about experience with water-based binder systems. Is there any sort of limitation in the metal powders that you can use with the selected binder that you currently got?
Okay, that's a good question. So as I pointed out, one of the core competencies within HP, and I'm talking about HP Inc. as a business, is that we have vast experience with print heads and printing agents binder. So our binder is proprietary to HP, so it's a latex-based binder, and it's basically designed to interface with our print heads specifically. And so in that case, what we have found, though, the nice thing about that is we have not found a material or a powder, metal powder yet, that is not compatible with our binder. We've used it with on titanium, doing some experimentation, copper, stainless steels, nickel-based superalloys, tungsten carbides. In all cases, the binder has burned off cleanly. With titanium, at least the preliminary studies that we did with that, it showed that there was very little residual carbon or oxygen pickup in the parts due to the binder. So there's a very clean burn off of that. So right now, the direct answer to Thomas's question is no, we have not found any limitations with our binder with metal powders to date.
Excellent. So have you? He's also asked, do you have any experience with copper specifically?
Yes. Yes, we have been doing a lot of development work with copper, hoping to have some announcements around that in the near term. But we've been able to, yes, we've done a lot of work around copper.
Okay, so
and I would say pure copper powders, as well as some copper nickel 30 alloys.
Right. So related again back to kind of like the sintering process. One of the questions I've got is, can you actually nest small parts so that you're utilizing that full volume, or is it best to just stick to printing on one layer? So you've got like these different build units that give you 150, 170 build height, but if your part's only say 30 millimeters, can you stack that 5 times to get 5 layers of the same part to utilize the full volume?
Yeah, so there's it's an interesting question. So one capability that the system does provide is we call it multi-level builds. So you can have different parts at different layers. And we do that. We have a couple of printing profiles or test profiles that we use that print different size parts at different layers within the system. Or if you wanted to print, like the study that I showed where I was comparing competitive positioning against laser systems, that was an example. We said, well, we'll put 800 say watch cases in a particular build and just stack them up, and do it. And we have customers doing that today. So you have multiple layers of the same part across say 10, 12, 13 layers of parts in a build. We also have customers doing different types of geometries in the same build that allow you to pull that out and do a lot of it. A lot of customers do that for experimentation purposes, so they will be able to do that. We have that capability as well.
So when you're doing the sintering process, and after you've depowdered, all of those individual parts are just laid out separately, so they're not kind of like, there's no danger of them all sticking together during that sintering process.
Exactly. So we'll position them on the sintering shelves or the trays in the sintering furnace accordingly, and optimize that accordingly in terms of the profile that we put in the sintering. But we try to maximize the loading of the furnace as much as possible.
So that's filling the volume with small parts. But how conceivable is it, or how sensible is it to say try and build one single large part that fills that volume, maximizes the?
Yeah, a lot of that is going to be limited to two things that kind of drive that experimentation or that capability. One is the curing process, because you are pulling a vacuum when you're curing, and the bigger the part, the more susceptible it is to maybe internal cracking or part defects accordingly, based on that vacuuming process of pulling the solvent out of the curing process. So that's one area you have to be concerned about. And again, the other is sintering because of the shrinkage factor. But what I'll say is that we've been able to show typically the sweet size in terms of part size for our applications, about a tennis ball size, softball size, give or take. Part is usually about a good size for us. But we've also been able to do parts up to about 13, 14 kilos in size, and have had good success in terms of outcomes for both printing and sintering that. That was actually a tool mold that Indemima printed with some internal channels of 13 kilogram part. So.
Wow. So there's no danger of in the green state them being too weak, even if it's quite a large mass of a part. Excellent. So that kind of leads us to this next question from Joshua Frizzell, who's asking about what percentage of the unprinted powder is recyclable, and how many times can you actually then reuse that powder, or do you continually refresh and mix and so on and so forth?
That's an excellent question, Joshua. I like those kind of questions because that's kind of my background as a metal powder and all. So I appreciate that question, Joshua. So the short answer to that is 100% of the reclaimed powder can be reused. So what we generally will do is in the depowdering, call it depowdering or decaking process of a build, you reclaim that unused or loose powder. We run that through a rebaking process to basically kind of reset that to class 0. Get any remaining solvent or anything. It could be residual solvent could be on it. So you rebake that powder, and all that powder is recycled and can go into the next build. And what we've seen is we've had customers cycle powder at least 50 or 60 times. And continuing to cycle the powder. And so that is one of the key benefits here, is that we don't see a huge PSD shift in the powder. Obviously you're going to see a little bit of drift in that, but it's not it's not impacting the part quality and all. And that but reclaiming all that powder and using 100% of that reclaimed powder for next build is a key benefit here. So yeah.
So really, any binder that gets sprayed into areas where it shouldn't isn't really going to contaminate the powder, because it's going to get debound anyway.
Well, Martin, we like to think that we're not spraying binder where it shouldn't, because we like to have that control where the part is. In terms of that, you do have some capillary effects of binder bleeding, we call it sometimes, that could go outside of that. But generally speaking, from the print head, due to the redundancy that we have of print heads in the system, very good control of where the binder is deposited and stays in that regard. But to your point, if there's any overspray that could happen, but we minimize that, but we try to rebake that, and that removes that out.
Ali Valley was asking a question about materials for teaching in his university course. I guess we'll put you in contact with them later, and you can probably deal with that separately. And then sure. Chris Rocker is also asking about if you can improve the material properties by combining a hip step with the sinter. Did you see that as a value add step?
Some of the, we talked about copper earlier. A lot of the parts that we have been doing with copper have dealt with liquid cold plates. Do a hipping stage there to do that. Some of the work that we've been doing with the tungsten carbide customer, they have a center hip furnace, and I was talking to them earlier, and then they ran some parts through there, and then got 100 almost full density parts in their center hip furnace. So hipping is an element that can be added to your part or process qualification to take the density up to almost full density. We tend to not include that in our part cost because, again, it's a variable. Not everybody needs that. But that is something that we have done and have used with particular applications that require that full densification.
And do you need to be like an expert in sintering to be able to use the S100, or do you provide the sort of like the cycle and the instructions?
I'd like to say no, you don't. And part of the concept behind this is us providing sintering profiles and sintering resources that we can connect customers with, is to kind of demystify that and make that more easily accessible to customers and not be afraid of it. Right. Hence because one of the things that we found is Hydrogen, I mean, people may be comfortable with using hydrogen, but a lot of localities, wherever your facility is located, tend to have a lot of regulations around hydrogen use and don't know how to control it, and the fire department gets kind of wigged out. And so what we looked at, well, let's start with argon. People more familiar with that. You can build a success case and build up to your success with argon, and then can transfer over to hydrogen later as you build that comfort level. So it gives the customers a capability of starting with argon, proven success, and then scaling into hydrogen as they want to scale that up.
So we're very close to the top of the hour now. So I just wanted to finish with one last question, really, about the different configurations that you show with the development, production, and the high volume. What are the price points for each of those configurations?
Yeah, I figured that question would come up sooner or later. So so on the development side, so I talked about the three configurations: S100D, the 100P, and then the 100. So the 100D, when you talk about a printer and curing station, that's less than $600,000 typically for that system. With all the tariffs and stuff going on, it's kind of moving around a little bit, but that's generally what we're saying. And then if you get into the 100P, now there are two elements to that. One is scaling up to the 100P. If you have a 100D system, when you scale up to 100P, it's a $30,000. I think it's $30,000 to upgrade fee to change the firmware and all in the system. And then all you need to do that, and then need to add the curing station. So for less than less than 175,000, you can scale up into the 100P from a D. Now, if you're just going into the 100P configuration from the start, that will run you about roughly about $750 to $1 million. It kind of depends on if you buy 2 build units and whatnot, but that's in the neighborhood. And as you scale up into the bigger mass production side of things, that's obviously well over $1 million. But that's you buy multiple printers, build units, cure stations, and so on and so forth. So, but entry level customers, as we talked about, is trying to get them in for less than 600,000 is the target.
All right, thank you for that, Brett. And thank you everyone for joining us today. I think we've run out of time now, but do keep your questions coming in. We will try and pass them on to HP and Brett, and they can answer them. We encourage everybody that's signed up that hasn't been able to make it today to log in and view the recording later on. This will be available online for some good time to come. So thank you everybody for watching. Thank you, Brett, for a fantastic presentation today, and we hope to see you next time. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everybody.